Well, welcome to the Beyond ArchViz talk that we're going to have today. For people who might not know what ArchViz is, it stands for Architectural Visualization. We're part of the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And just a quick show of hands, who's aware of that industry or maybe part of that industry? Most of you guys, perfect. So we're not going to have to explain any of our acronyms or anything like that, so that'll be awesome. But what we will do is mostly this presentation, we're looking at 9 different case studies of projects we've done, working through and how that's kind of taught us along our path of how we've used Unity and VR. So I'm Marc Kinsman. Background is in construction management. I did 3D modeling and coordination in the industry for a while before I started to switch over to what we're doing now.
And I'm Will Adams. I come from the architecture side of things, and I've been using Unity for about 3.5 years now.
So we're part of a group called Virtual Insights, which is a department in a larger organization called Mortenson. So Mortenson is a large general contractor, top 20 in the United States, and they build pretty much anything you can think of, from large stadiums to solar and wind farms, college campuses, hospitals. And so we have a lot of different people that we work with. Within that, Virtual Insights is a group that's newly formed. We've been kind of loosely associated for 3 years, and for the last year, an official group. And what our focus is within the company is looking at our customer. As I said, we just worked with a wide range of them, and seeing all of the pieces and parts during that process of needing to build a new building, from the moment they say, I might need something new because I don't have enough capacity, to when they're hiring facilities people to take care of that. And all of those pain points throughout that process, what can we do to help alleviate some of those problems, specifically by looking at emerging technologies and how those might apply. So as we're seeing new stuff come out, how can we help our customers with that?
And so we're a very small group, and kind of our strategy within the company is that we generate revenue, but not a lot of revenue, basically just enough revenue to cover our costs. And we're very much an R&D group. So we try and split our time between working on production and stuff that's for customers for real value, and then some of our time on just kind of breaking things. And our work is always kind of in progress, and we're never really done testing and tweaking and improving things. So we do a lot of different types of projects, but for this particular presentation, we're going to focus on our work in immersive VR. And this is definitely not a comprehensive list of our projects, but it's kind of a cross-section of the types of work that we found provides value to our customers.
So we wanted to start with a little bit of a story that I find quite funny, and I think that a lot of people in the industry will identify with, and it might also give a little bit of insight to what we're working with in architecture, engineering, and construction. So what you see on screen is not architecture or construction, a lot of engineering, but it's the space shuttle. I'm pretty sure it's the Endeavour. And when I think about the space shuttle, I think of cutting edge technology, really sophisticated stuff that we're doing. We're working through everything, getting people out into space safely. But if we look at some of the pieces and parts here, for example, the booster rocket that they use to get up out of the atmosphere, you kind of see some design considerations, like the fact that you need to take that booster rocket, build it somewhere else, transport it to the launch site. And so by doing that, they use trains. And so one of the major design criteria for the booster rockets is that it has to be transported on a train. And a train hasn't changed much through the years. This one was running on coal. We can go back to horse-drawn trains, and throughout all of that, they've ran on the standard Stevenson railway track, which is a width of 4 foot 8.5 inches, which is also the same width that you see in carriage tracks in a lot of the places with cobblestones. And the reason for that is because the Roman chariot and carriages had a width of 1 peso, or 4 foot 8.5 inches. And so the reason why those were that width is because they were drawn by 2 horses. So if we follow all of that logic, super high-tech space shuttle, kind of the cutting edge of what we can do, designed because of it has to fit behind 2 horses' asses. And that is kind of something we see in the construction industry, is we have a lot of these things that since the dawn of time, we've been building buildings, and we haven't wanted to change. We've stayed using the same methods, and well, let's just do a little bit, but not really change all of what we're going to do. And that really kind of irks us. And when we look at how we can help our customers, we wanted to look at three main, as we will call them, horses' asses, that we see that we think technology can help with. So the first one we'll look at is kind of that design process and how we can help facilitate that, how we train our personnel, and then how we engage our customers and the people that they work with to be a little bit more involved in our projects.
Thank you. So when Marc and I started this group, VR was kind of all the rage, and we're in construction, and so it made a lot of sense to try and use VR for in the design process, and that was really the low-hanging fruit. So with that, there's several challenges that we're focusing on. We do really big projects, and one of the challenges with those big projects is that we have really distributed teams. So large projects involve people and teams from all over the world, and this makes shared understanding pretty difficult. Our kind of tools for communicating between each other are email, phone calls, maybe some video conference. And we're going across time zones, so there's all these kind of barriers to communication. So this is a map of the physical location of people from our Golden State Warriors project. So all over the US and really all over the world. Another challenge is that there's this thing that happens in the AEC industry, which is basically the flattening floor documents. So currently, almost all buildings are designed in 3D using a package like Revit or something like that. But contracts are in 2D, and so what happens is once the design is completed, that design gets flattened into 2D documents and then passed over to the contractors. Contractors rehydrate those 2D documents into 3D, and things change along the way. So because of estimates coming in too high or constructability issues, just things are basically different, and those changes are often not communicated in 3D. And that becomes a really big issue for the owners and stakeholders of these projects because they don't really have an understanding of how to base their decisions, and we need them to make decisions, really for the good of their projects and also just to get the projects done. So it can be really hard for them to figure out, what to do. So one of the first projects that Marc and I worked on was a couple years ago, was a mock-up for a corridor in a hotel in downtown Seattle. Oops. And so, this is a video. There we go. Things that were important to get right for this project were that the materials were going to be very accurate, that the lighting was accurate. It basically provided a convincing presence when you were in that environment. And so it was essentially just an ArchViz project that was in VR. And when we do mock-ups in the construction industry, it's for a hotel corridor mock-up, it's typically just going to be a slice of the corridor. It'll be like a guest room door, and like some wall and ceiling and floor above it and the side of it. But since we did it in VR, we were able to mock up, the entire corridor with not, a huge amount of extra expense. And so that proved really valuable. So I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about mock-ups in the AEC industry. So mock-ups are a really important part of the design process in the AEC industry. We use them for repeated elements, such as this one right here. This is a mock-up of a patient room in a hospital, which might get repeated 300 times. And it's really important to kind of practice that room and get it right, because if you build it 300 times and you make the same mistake 300 times and you have to go fix it, then it becomes really expensive. And we also use those mock-ups for unique but critical spaces, such as operating rooms, where it's really important that we also get that right, because any downtime fixing things after we commission that room is going to be really expensive or just bad for patients. So one of the problems about these physical mock-ups is they're a really time-intensive process, and they're also really difficult to iterate. So, when we build these things, we don't really get it right the first time. We have to go back and fix it, and we get stakeholders in there and get their feedback. And so it's a really time-intensive project, and that can really extend the schedule of these projects, which essentially increases cost. Another problem is that they don't really actually look like the finished space, and it can be really hard for people to kind of make that connection from this plywood to what they're actually going to get. So going back to this, this hotel corridor mock-up, we reviewed this mock-up with the interior designer, and she spent about 45 minutes in the environment. It's not that big of an environment. It's just kind of this L-shaped or T-shaped corridor and another leg. And she made 15 or 20 decisions or changes that period of time. So that was really awesome for us because we were able to get all these decisions made in a short period of time, which can be, if you are in this industry, that can be a really difficult process to get done. So we're really happy about that. But after that process, the estimates for the wall covering came in too high. And so what we did is we quickly built this little interface to be able to change the combinations of the wall covering and the ceiling material. And the owner came in, got in the environment for like 5 minutes and switched through all the different combinations, walked around a bit, made a decision, and we were good to go. And that's kind of where, the switch from being like a design review to a design assist. And when we really kind of started thinking about or realizing, what the value of that interactivity that we added into the environment was. So next project I'm going to talk about was a mock-up for Kaiser Permanente, major healthcare provider. And we realized that the earlier we were able to do this in the design process, the more value we'd be able to provide. So hotel corridor mock-ups usually happen pretty late in the design process, but not all mock-ups are like that. And earlier this spring, we did this project much earlier in the process. So it's a mock-up of interventional radiology room, which is basically an operating room and an imaging room combined. And it's a small space. It's like 30 foot by 30 foot, and there's a lot of people are going to work together in this space, and they need to work together pretty seamlessly. So it's one of those critical spaces I referenced earlier. And so what we did was we rigged up all the booms and the equipment so that basically all the stakeholders could set it up for the different procedures that they do in that room. And we networked it so that we could get as many of them in there as possible to simulate what that procedure would actually be like. This happened way too early in the process for us to build a physical mock-up. So I think that's kind of significant that you can get this done and really impact the design process in a way that you never really would have been able to do before. And so one of the things we were focused on with this is that just injecting a lot of that interactivity into the space, and we didn't really care about how it looked so much as long as it just wasn't distracting, because we didn't want people to get hung up on the materiality of the space. We wanted them to focus on how that space was actually going to operate for them. And so we were really interested in what was going to happen in this situation. These are two surgical techs, and they're basically the people who go in and set up the operating room before each procedure. And they kind of have control over just all the parameters of that room. And so here they are, two of them working together to set up the room for a leg procedure. And we had this as a part of that, we had this big working session where about 20 people from Kaiser came to our office, and we had this big working session which presented a lot of challenges and opportunities. It was interesting to work with such a large group in a design review situation where we only had, we had 2 Vives set up and a couple desktops that were, set up to access the environment as well, just on a 2D screen. So there was way more people than there were, access points into this environment. And the users had a ton of feedback about, that environment, and they wanted to make changes and add things. And I didn't really have anything set up for that, when we went into this. So I was basically trying to model things on the fly and change things. And that worked out, but it was definitely not smooth. And I realized that it would be way better if those people have the ability to make the changes themselves. And so, that was a moment where, it seemed like there's this great opportunity to kind of develop these new tools that would be able to engage those users and give them more agency over the design. And so we've been incorporating those kind of lessons from that Kaiser project into the work we're doing for Citizen M Hotels. So Citizen M is a global chain of hotels. They basically do projects in large cities all over the world. So this project right here is going to be built in Seattle next year, where we're based. And we incorporated a pretty detailed and realistic site, because that was pretty important for kind of the layout of this project. And a bunch of the elements of the design that they're struggling with. So for instance, these louvers here along the sidewalk are based on a discussion that they're having with the design review board on how pedestrians are going to experience that. And so basically, being able to iterate through different combinations. We made it so you could change the time of day and the time of year, which is really important for their operations people, and how the sun's going to impact them when when their representatives are trying to check people in, and also just for the guests. Things like that ceiling, they're trying to figure out what kind of, if they want to have this wood ceiling, and if they want it wood, what direction the green's going to go, stuff like that. And so Citizen M's headquarters is in Amsterdam, and one of the challenges they have is their design process is moving way too slowly, or way more slowly than they'd like. And so I traveled to Amsterdam earlier this summer and set them up with a couple of VR headsets in their office, basically so we could try and help their design process by making it more interactive and try and speed that process up. So we took lessons from that Kaiser project, basically some markup tools that allow people to add elements to the design, and those are sent up to a database, so they're just going to persist in that environment. And there's some screenshot tools and other stuff, and we're working on more tools as we continue to work with Citizen M. We're doing a bunch of hotels for them. So it's a really interesting kind of sandbox for us to test out these tools and see what's useful for them, and how how they're going to be able to use them to improve their communication internally and speed up that design process. So to kind of wrap up this section, VR is obviously really great for giving people a sense of presence within the space, but it's also really great for kind of presence between people, because using the HTC Vive, for example, you have a head and two hands, and you can kind of tell where people are looking, and you can there's hand gestures. And so this is a page from my sketchbook where I'm thinking about how can we make those interactions between people more natural, and feel like you're actually in the same room with the people instead of across the world. And so there's a ton of stuff to figure out with this, and it's pretty exciting and pretty fun to keep working on these tools.
All right, we're going to switch gears a bit. So we looked about how we can work with our design teams and our customers, but we also hire a lot of people, and we build our own buildings, and we hire subcontractors that are also building. So training is a big thing for us, and so once we started to see how we can start to work inside of VR and look at different environments, we started to explore the idea of training, as I said, for our own people, but also for our owners and their facilities teams to see if they can understand the projects. And we identified a couple major problems that we see right now with training, and one of the first ones is the timeliness of that. So everyone has a lot of stuff to do in construction, and we're gonna do it and keep going up to the last second, and then we have to switch tasks and move to something else. And we often don't see this optimal time for training. And so it feels like you know, you're go, 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 and then you look at your next task and you're like, I don't even have any clue on how to do that, so I need some training right now. And if it's not there and readily available, you're just gonna kind of make it up as you go along, which is not optimal for us. Or the other option is you'll hit all your training in some sort of downtime. And this happens particularly for the facilities folks as we start to bring our buildings online and train the people who are gonna operate those buildings. We get done with enough work, we say, okay, we're ready to train you. Book out an entire week, we're gonna sit down in a room and just throw a ton of information at you, and hopefully you'll soak enough of it up. And the problem with that is once you start to get that overload, you're not gonna remember the small, subtle, important things that might be gotchas. And so looking at those two, we started to figure out what we can do as a project to explore this. And we did a project with the University of Washington. There was a master's student who approached us who was interested in this, and we partnered with them, as we do with a lot of research projects, and we're exploring how to do some facilities training on their West Campus utility plant. And this plant is an important piece to note. It's a secondary plant from their main plant that mostly is automated, and so there shouldn't be any employees in here unless something wrong is happening. And so when we started to look at the workflows that were in place for the main utility plant and this alternate utility plant, we realized that that automation system actually could cause a little bit of a complication. So as you're going to work in the medium voltage switchgear, and they call it medium, but it's like 4160 or something like that, which is way more than enough to kill you. And if you forget one important step, as you start to go through it, you start working on that piece, you think you're locked out like you would on your main plant, automation system can bypass you, turn it back on, electrocute you, and you're done for. So if you imagine sitting in a week of training and saying, okay, well, all this information is being thrown out, and they said, oh, by the way, you have to twist and pull as opposed to just twist. Are you gonna remember that when you come back 3 weeks later or 3 months later to try to do something? And so our idea was that people learn by doing. And if we can get them to actually do those steps, the whole twist and pull and all of the other pieces, that they're gonna retain that better. And if it's virtually done, they can go in their main plant where they're normally stationed and refresh themselves on some of these trainings. And so that's how we started to look at what we were doing. And so we modeled the entire environment like you saw that was exactly correct to the alternative utility plant. And we actually did all of the interlocks and the steps involved in locking out those switch gears that you would do as well. So it is exactly pertinent to that plant. It's not a generic training or something like that. It was pretty nice. They really liked it. But what we realized when we went to the next one is it's not scalable in the slightest. So this is our office. Me and Will, we have one more person in Minneapolis. And so it took me about 3 months to do this training for one piece of one project. And so if I want to do all of the training for the project, would not be able to do it in time. And if I want to do all the training for all of our projects, I'd need to hire like 100 more people or more. And so even though the value was there, if we look back at our two major issues, the timeliness and that retention, we got retention, but timeliness didn't work at all. So we started working with our safety team on another project. We said, okay, well, we can do a little bit better. Let's see what we can do here. And we came up with something we call interactive jobsite. And what this is a mobile app that uses the Google Cardboard. You can select from a list of trainings that are created, and your phone will pull them down here. And what it does is it'll drop you into a 360 photo that we can have taken of our job site. So you feel like you're there in the environment. You can look around, and as you see, you can try to identify stuff. So this is looking for safety hazards. If you click it and it's not a hazard, it'll tell you, but if you find the right one, lo and behold, you can be asked questions. And that's a kind of the second part. If you had someone in there just clicking on everything, they may get lucky. But if you tie that with some sort of specific questions or hard numbers that need to happen, you'll make sure that they understand it. We grade them, we take all the analytics. And then the big part about scalability is we also made a website that went along with it. So all of our course content creation isn't in Unity anymore, but we're actually having this external website where you load your images, you load your masks, you create your questions, all of that goes to our databases in the cloud, which will automatically update on our app. And so it becomes really easy for anybody to use this platform. We're no longer the bottleneck. We can have the safety managers on site. They use like a Ricoh Theta or even the Google camera, create their photospheres, create some simple masks, and put it all together. And so when someone says, I need, in closed space training, we don't have one yet, someone can go make that, and from after you take the pictures, it takes maybe an hour before it's on the app and ready to go. And then anybody can take it the way we want. And so this has been pretty scalable for us. And when we rolled it out to the projects, it worked well until we realized when we use it as groups, everyone becomes isolated in their own little environment. And we run group training for a very specific reason. And that reason is the fact that everyone has different experiences on the job site. Everyone's done a little bit of a different thing. And so when you put people together in the same room, those life experiences come out, people tell stories, and everyone learns better as a result. So to take that piece and really subtract that from these groups, it can still be valuable. We can still check understanding, make sure people have done training, but we're not really getting the full effect of the training we want. Works well for safety, but for our quality team, they noticed that right away, and so they asked us for a different project. Quality is a little bit more insubstantial than safety. It's not, are you above a certain height for fall protection? It's, is that going to be a high enough quality to give to our owner? What do our finishes look like? And so it becomes more about the people. So this is a project we're kind of hypothesizing on and we'll hopefully start working on soon. So we just kind of don't have any videos, but some graphics. But what we do have a lot of in our industry is point clouds. So our idea going forward is that if we utilize our point clouds, we can create a system of environments where you can go in with other people and start to explore those. And so again, we wanted it to be timely, so point clouds can make it so we don't have to model anything. And it looks pretty realistic. We're not having to model the inaccuracies or the inconsistencies. But what you can do is you can take people that might be anywhere in the country, and someone with a ton of value like Bruce, who's in our Seattle office, has been working with us for 43 years, an immense amount of knowledge within, kind of his mind. And if anybody wanted to ask him something on a project, they'd walk out to the project and he'd explain it to them. But if it's someone in Milwaukee needed to ask him the same questions because he's built a lot of a certain type of work, he can either fly out there or try to explain it over phone, and that just doesn't work for us. So once we're in that environment where we can be in a sports stadium or we can be at the beginning of concrete, you have a place where you can talk and you can use a lot of our collaboration tools we talked about in design, where we can draw pictures and take screenshots and really have a full conversation and dialogue where you transfer that knowledge to the other person. And that's kind of the culmination of what we're thinking about with training, especially in VR, is people are teaching the people. So you can have some kind of base level knowledge checks, but that's not the most value that we can provide. And the people working together and understanding from each other and having that communication has been the most valuable. So we're trying to connect people even when we have any sort of environment. It's always having multiplayer and connecting those people together so that we can get every last ounce of training usefulness that we can.
All right, so this next section is kind of about our efforts in engaging customers, and something kind of we didn't initially set out to do, but we kind of discovered that there's this thing where people might not know or care what's happening behind that fence in that job site, but it can actually be a really good thing to make them aware of it and maybe even make them care. For example here, students might be annoyed that their daily route is blocked by this job site and they have to take a detour, but if you get them excited about the project, it's a win for the university. And if you want to do this, you can't do something like this. Uptake speed is super important, and you really can't get people excited by just flipping through a stack of documents. And so one of our first projects that really kind of got into this wasn't actually, we didn't set out to have this be something for customer engagement. It's this intramural building that we built for Penn State University. And the reason we started this project was we wanted to help the project team specifically with this climbing wall. The project manager on the Penn State side was having a hard time selecting the color combination, that he wanted for that wall. It's a very, has these big windows, it's very obvious, it's kind of the centerpiece of that project. And so he had selected one color combination, and it turned out to be a really good thing that we did this because, we created that ability to change colors and look at it from different angles, and he ended up selecting a different color combination than the one he had initially picked, which is a great result. But then what happened was that there's a bunch of high-level decision makers that use that VR environment, and they were really excited about it, and they said, well, we want to show we want to show this to students because we really want to get our students excited about this. And they asked about climbing. They're like, can you make it so we can climb up this climbing wall? And we said, sure, that's not too hard to do. So we built in climbing, set up a couple routes, and it generated a ton of excitement. And people were able to kind of get used to the building and how it would look without it being built. And when you're at an institution like university, consensus building is really important, and this was really part of that. And so we set up a Vive in the student center, and we're able to engage a bunch of students. And we were not expecting it to be so powerful, so we were kind of surprised by that. There you go.
So that project actually led directly to this next one. So we happened to be doing some research with DeWalt, the tool company, on that Penn State project, looking at a hardened Wi-Fi repeater. And so as we started to roll this out to the students and see it, of course the research people with DeWalt saw it as well, and really had some of the ideas of their own and said, can you make us something that would help kind of on our side? So we made them this video game, which was a little out of our comfort zone, but a ton of fun, where you are going through the job site and you are enlivening these Wi-Fi repeaters. And what they can do is they'll create a mesh network that gives you Wi-Fi over the entire project site. And the key piece that they want to get across is once you have this Wi-Fi mesh, you can do other things. So there's an iPad app that they're building to associate with it that should come up here, where you can start to see different items that can be tracked using that Wi-Fi mesh, like personnel or materials or tools. And so that's been very kind of a hard piece for them to explain to people, that all of these different aspects. And so we made the game in such that a way that the game reinforced those concepts, and you can kind of pick that up. But it was also fun, and this 1v1, you were actually scoring points against another person. You could have some complexities where you would try to take down their Wi-Fi network by placing your own Wi-Fi network. And we had quite a fun time with it. And the reason that we wanted to go this route is that is kind of an abstract concept, Wi-Fi mesh networks. And I'll say it this way, we're not most tech savvy in the construction industry. So as you come and try to talk to people about that and explain it, they just got a bunch of blank stares, like, why would I need this? It's quite expensive, to be honest. And so explaining that concept in such a way that you didn't have to talk about what it was for or explain the reasons why I do it, you just understand it through playing the game. That was pretty useful for them. But we kind of experienced some other things. So this is a picture of us at that media day. They had around 200 media personnel, YouTube personalities, writers for columns, and they were going to come through and see all the new technology, this being one of them. And they needed to have those people understand it quickly, understand the usefulness of that, so they could write about it or talk about it to everybody else. And so we were one station that people were rotating through. We had 4 Oculus systems set up, so 2 games could be run independently. And we found that we took a lot of time getting people in there, explaining what VR was, explaining the buttons of what VR do, starting them in the environment for this 5-minute session, having to pull them aside and remind them what things were. So we replaced the complexity of the system we were trying to explain with the complexity of VR. And so that was a little bit of an awakening for us of how can we make these even more simple, and how can we make this so that as we're trying to explain something to people, we can broadcast it to as many people as possible. There was 200 people at that event. We maybe got 50 of them through during that day as other people were watching. So a lot of people understood it, but how can we expand that so thousands of people can understand some things?
Yeah, so this is a project we're about to start working on, taking kind of some of those lessons that we've learned previously. It's a practice facility for the Chicago Bears. And basically continuing this theme of engagement through interaction and trying to get people to understand it quickly. The concept of this project is to build, engagement for bears, personnel, players, and fans. And how we want to do that is through kind of these mini games. So it's like we want to encourage exploration through their facility by having these little mini games kind of set up in different locations. So this mini game here is, our concept for like this armchair quarterback game where it's in their turf classroom, which is basically a big gym with AstroTurf and some big screens. And so you play the quarterback and you got to make passes to your receiver who's running these routes, and you got to hit him in the hands and hit him at the right time. And then here's another one, decorate your locker or customize your locker. So the idea is that some players could go in and basically, customize their locker the way they would, their actual locker, draw their posters or jersey, stuff like that in there. And then maybe the fans could come in later and check out what those players had done and maybe even customize their own locker. And so, kind of wrapping up this section, we were definitely surprised by how excited, we weren't really excited by surprised by how excited people were who were actually using the VR. Because it's a really cool technology, but we were surprised by how excited like our construction executives and these higher level people were about the little games that we had been developing, and so we kind of realized how important engagement is, customer engagement is in our industry, and that kind of this interaction within these spaces kind of equals engagement. Even if it just seems like it's a silly little game.
So we'll wrap up with a couple conclusions to hopefully make our points clear. We talked about 3 different areas of what we called horses' asses. How can we change the industry a little bit for the better and take away some of these pain points? So within design, asynchronous collaboration and working with different people to get a bunch of people together and have this common language that we can speak through has really simplified a lot of the things we do, and so that's something we'll carry forward as we work. Personnel training and the importance of actually incorporating more people to work together as we have, project teams that work on things or different groups that work as teams outside of the project. And then that customer engagement is that kind of surprising one for us that we find ourselves doing more and more, but taking those customers and bringing them into the project and making them interested and want to be participatory in all the actions that we're doing and having them help explain that to their owners or their stakeholders so that those people want to give them the correct advice so that that building's going to be right. And through all of this, it's been important for us to remember that what we're doing is not about the really cool technology in VR. As we start to code more things and program, we get really excited. Oh, we could do this new feature and add one of these and work more and more on it. And then we got to take a step back and say, okay, we're not in the game industry as much as it would be fun to do something like that. But what we're doing is we're building projects for real people for the betterment of their societies. And so to do that properly, we have to make sure that we're always looking at the people we're building that environment for and how is that going to help them during their building process. And that's where we keep coming back to. If it's about the people, we should incorporate more people and more interactions in it to keep them all together. And because we're working on so many different projects with different people, one of the other things we've realized is that flexibility is really important. And that's been one of the key pieces for us in using Unity. We started with trying to create a template and using some other solutions, and it never quite worked for that one project that we're trying to do for an NFL team or a hospital, and we needed to have that bespoke solution for them so that they can actually take away that specific pain point. And that's where we started getting into teaching ourselves the programming and all the other pieces to do it, because every project that we've done has looked quite different, and we've had different customers. And so to work through those problems with them, we find ourselves going in a lot of directions, which has been quite fun for us, but nothing we quite expected. So that's it. Thank you. We can do questions. There is microphones, so I'm going to make sure you guys talk through those microphones to ask us our questions. I know you'll have to walk a little bit, but.
I deal with a lot of 3D designers, and whatnot, and I was just wondering, at what point do you start building out the VR app, as opposed to the hotel lobby, per se? One of the buttons on the elevator could be, one of the designers will make it 10,000 polygons or whatever, something ridiculous. So do you start building the VR part of it at the same time, or do you wait for the renderings to get done and then you go in and try to optimize everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, it kind of really depends on the project, but I would say typically we're getting involved kind of after most of the design has been done. Ideally, the time that we get involved is a little bit before then, maybe in kind of SDs, that's like schematic design. We do need to do a ton of remodeling to make things look right. If it's a environment that requires pretty high visual fidelity, we essentially need to remodel everything. And so, we can iterate through things, but we try and be strategic about what we are iterating through. And so, like for that particular project, hotel corridor mockups happen kind of later in the process, and when it's already mostly been designed. And so that process is kind of about showing the designer and the owner, well, this is what has been documented, and this is what we're going to build unless you want to do something different. And so that's really an important thing to realize, is that a lot of times designers don't really realize the implications of their design because they haven't thought through every little corner and detail of it. And there's a lot of small things that kind of add up to a lot of big things when you're talking about like a corridor that you're going to repeat 15 times.
Any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, I've got one. So you were saying that your division doesn't generate a lot of profit, but I'm curious, what kind of budgets do some of these projects end up generating or consuming?
Yeah, so typically our, it totally depends. I'll say that these projects, the projects that we showed you, generally take us about like a month and a half to do, and it's typically like maybe one and a half people working on that project. So it's like, maybe 2 months worth of 1 to 2 months worth of one person's time to complete these projects. And the way we do things is we basically provide a lump sum proposal to whoever wants us to do that, and then it's go or no go.
And those 3 steps you mentioned, can't remember now, but training, design, and customers. How do you deal with remote, people cross country? Because VR usually requires on-site. Do you have solutions for that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways we deal with it. Sometimes we're gonna actually provide all the hardware for that customer and ship it out to them. We have project teams that are all over the country and sometimes internationally. So we can often just leverage our project team to set up that customer with the hardware they need, and then we can kind of usually troubleshoot through our team. Sometimes we'll actually physically go there and get them set up. For that Citizen project, I went to Amsterdam, set them up with a couple Vives, and basically set up their room so that they have a room, and then we have networked sessions between us in Seattle, in New York, and Amsterdam right now. Anything else?
Seems about good time. I think we're roughly done. We'll hang out just outside of here for questions after if anybody has more of those or kind of want to talk about stuff that you guys didn't want to throw up in front of everybody else. But thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for your time.